You're listening to the Savoir Faire audio experience.
Are you ready?
The Savoir Faire experience is your guide to everything that has to do with lifestyle. From dating, rides, style, and entertainment. All brought to you by the editor of Savoir Faire magazine, Robert White. Anything goes on this audio experience. So, let's go.
It's still the best.
All right, guys, welcome to the Savoir Faire audio experience. Thank you for listening, following, and sharing. We really appreciate you. Please keep that up. We love bringing you really unique and interesting interviews, and today is really no exception. I think we're going to be talking to a gentleman that has made a huge mark in the New York City landscape, and I'm super excited to speak with him. David Rothenberg is here today. How are you, David?
Fine. Good morning. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning to you too, and thank you so much for finding time to chat with me a little bit and talk a little bit about you and some of the things you've done in your career. I'm super excited to talk about a lot of different topics with you this morning, but we would definitely want to focus on a new project that you just released. There might be a lot of people listening that don't know who you are, David. So if you could just take the floor and give me a little bit of your backstory, that'd be really nice.
Well, they should join the parade because sometimes I don't know who I am. You have to keep reflecting on it. Who am I? Well, ask me a key question. Where was I born when I came to New York?
Well, you had a rich history, right? You talked to me a little bit about being in the service, came to New York. There's a lot of things there.
Robert, I'll do a quick bio. I was born in New Jersey. Teaneck High School, went to college at the University of Denver, went into the Army, came to New York determined to work in the theater. And got a job in 1958 when I got out of the Army in a press office. And it's what I wanted to do. And I had an aunt who said to me, if this is what you really want to do, you have to remember one thing when you work, your work habit and ethics becomes your resume. You don't need one. And it's what I wanted to do. And I just kept working in the theater and getting better jobs. And eventually was the press representative for Alexander Cohn, who's one of the prominent Broadway producers in the golden era of theater, and worked on some of the big shows of that time, including, and the one that became life-changing for me. It was the Richard Burton Hamlet. Amidst all of this is sort of theater history, maybe lost to younger people, but there was a period when Richard Burton met Elizabeth Taylor when they were filming Cleopatra in Rome. Both were married, and it became worldwide scandal because they left their mates, and they were both. She particularly was the golden queen of cinema at that time, the first actress ever to get $1 million in a movie. So they left their mates, traveled to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, where he was filming Night of the Iguana. At which point, producer Alex Cohn said to me, "We're going to do Hamlet. You." Richard Burton starring, John Gielgud is directing, and you're going to handle the press. And that became an experience. It's almost, if there's a current equivalent, it's when I watch Taylor Swift and Travis, what's his last name, the football
Kelsey,
player.
yeah.
Yeah, when I watch the crowds and the mobs and the hysteria, which, red carpet personified, and it looks glamorous from a distance. And I certainly don't blame the people. I don't blame Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, particularly her, who I found wonderful to work with. But the crowds and the mobs really made the theater almost secondary to the hysteria. And there I was at the top of my profession as a theater publicist, working with the most celebrated show at the time, and I wanted out because it wasn't what I wanted. And I took a freighter to Italy, because I had worked on an Italian musical the year before, and I hung out with my Italian friends, and I said, if I come back to America, I want to work in the theater, but I want to work on theater that's about something. And I came back, and I opened my own office, and I worked on a Tennessee Williams play on Broadway, and a Harold Pinter play, and several of Edward Albee's plays. But I read a script that was sent to me by Nathan Cohn, who was a critic at the Toronto Star, and he said, nobody in Canada is going to do this play. See if you can get it produced. And I read a play called Fortune in Men's Eyes. I sat in bed and read it, and I read it twice. And I wrote a letter to the playwright, John Herbert, and I said, I felt like I was trapped in a room with four cobras. It turned out it was a play that he had written in a burst of energy, reflecting on his own experience as a 16-year-old who was arrested, put in jail, and gang raped his first night in jail. And when I met John, he told me, and I said, this play has to get on. I was shocked not only by the content of the play, but the fact that I was so ignorant of a whole subculture that existed of what happened when young people went to prison. And when I met John, I told him this play has to be seen and heard. And people thought I was nuts because you don't do a play about a kid getting raped.
Mm-hmm.
But that became my determination. And with the actors, when we were in rehearsal, actors always like to investigate the character, the depths of their characters. And they wanted to go to a city jail, and I went into Rikers Island with them to a juvenile unit and saw these kids. They were big, but they were kids, 16, 17, 18, just sitting, staring into space. And in my head then, I think I became an activist without knowing it, because I said, whatever they're here for, whatever brought them into this environment, this juvenile facility, how are they going to be any better when they get out? And how does our society suffer from the inability of the prison system to be anything more than a holding post? So that next question.
No, I love that, and so that led you to launching the Fortune Society, correct?
Well, the Fortune Society literally came to life on the stage of the Actors Playhouse, because we were running for about 3 weeks. Very provocative reviews. Those that didn't like it were enraged about it, but those that liked it, Jerry Telmer and the New York Post compared it with De Seeker's The Bicycle Thief, which is pretty heavy-duty praise. And a professor from St. John's University called me and said, I'm bringing a group of students Tuesday night. Can we stay and talk with the actors afterwards about the play? Well, that was right up my alley, and we invited the whole audience to stay. And they did, because it was the kind of play that you wanted to stick around and talk about. Mm-hmm. And while the audience was complimentary, one man challenged the play's authenticity. And from the back of the house, a voice said, if my 20 years in joints like this counts for anything, you people couldn't watch what happens to us. And I said to him, come on down. And a man named Pat McGarry came down and sat with us on the stage and mesmerized the audience about his experiences on Rikers Island and Clinton Prison, the Florida chain gang, San Quentin. And I said to him, we had coffee afterwards, and I said, Pat, you have to come back next week. People have to hear this. And he said, everybody knows this. And I said, no, they don't. This was 1967. The formerly incarcerated was an invisible population, because anybody that had done, well, I'll explain to you. So Pat said, I did white time. You got to get a black guy. And I said, what do you mean white time and black time? And he said, well, when I was on Rikers, we had black wings and we had white wings, and in most joints they're separated. And he said, and I said, well, I don't know anybody. And he said, well, I do. And he came back the following week with a man named Clarence Cooper. And that started weekly discussions on the stage, and the audience loved it. And I called Cy Peck at the New York Times, and I said, this is a real story. And the Times had a headline that said, the drama continues after the curtain falls. And the following Tuesday night during the Q&A after the play, I realized there were about 15 guys there that had done time, that came to see it. And we all went across the street for coffee. And what I found out, most of them were staying out of trouble. They were in AA. Almost all of them were in either AA or NA. They had jobs, but all of them had lied to get their jobs. And they said if their records were found out, that they would lose their jobs. None of them had a lease to where they lived. They either had a girlfriend, a relative, or a buddy that signed the lease. And I said, well, when does your punishment end? And they all shouted at me, it's for life. And I said, well, it doesn't make any sense. It's that's not my idea of justice or fairness. So these guys kept coming back every Tuesday night. It was almost cathartic for them. And on one Tuesday night, I said, we have a nucleus of an organization with your stories and your lives, putting a face on it. we could change public and political perception, and all of these barriers that you're facing, maybe we can erase them. And 16 people gave me $2, and we opened up a bank account for $32, and my little theater office in Times Square became the headquarters. I never thought it would be anything more than my sort of like my Rotary Club or Kiwanis Club. And a lot of guys who had done time were hanging out in my office, but I was arranging for them to speak at schools and colleges and then radio shows. And every time they made an appearance or on the radio, suddenly a half a dozen people would show up in my office asking for help, jobs, housing, thinking we were a service organization and we were just advocates working out of a theater office. It was a paradox. And my building was all theater people. Elia Kazan was a floor below. Producer Barbara Whitehead was down the hall. And in the middle of all this was my office, which was a combination of theater production and men and women coming out of prison. And Fortune Society grew because of its desperate need for people coming out. So today, 57 years later, me long retired but still an active volunteer, we have an organization with 600 people working for us. And wow. One of the big issues was, of course, 50% of the people coming out of prison or jail are homeless. They were homeless when they went in, they're homeless when they come out. And we created a residence called the Castle. And we now have 6 of them. But the first one became sort of the signature and a showcase for how people can land and have a new opportunity. And about 15 years ago, the theater and me said to some of the guys, when we meet every Thursday night, I go every Thursday night, the residents have a meeting with the staff, all of whom are formerly incarcerated. And some of the stories were so dramatic. And I said, we have a play here. And I talked to 3 of the men and 1 of the women, and we put together a play called it The Castle, which is where they were all living. And we did it as a fundraiser for one weekend, and a producer saw it, Eric Krebs, and moved it off Broadway, where it ran for a year at the New World Stages. Now it's still, afterwards, we still play at jails and prisons and colleges. You're up in Corning. We're gonna be up in Manhattanville on Memorial Weekend. Is that near you?
Yeah, that's not really close to me, but it's worth it's worth the trip for sure. I mean, that's something I could definitely.
It's a national conference on in the end of May and Memorial Weekend, and with a showcase for the conference. It's an anti-violence conference.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, like David, it's a really great honor to talk to you about the Fortune Society and what you've created, and 600 people now involved in that project is an amazing number. But I definitely want to put some word out there and some positive vibes out there to let you know that needs to be bigger, and it needs to expand. And your mission and what you did from just reading a play, creating the play, and then having it go into something that really changes a lot of lives. I think that's an amazing accomplishment. And so glad that you followed that path that you were put on to create that, because that's something that a lot of people kind of look into. And I knew I was going to have to talk to you about the Fortune Society today, because it's just a huge piece of who you are and what you believe in. And it's a huge part of our community now, obviously in New York, but other places too. And so I just wanted to make sure we had a chance to really talk about that story. One of the big things.
I also want to emphasize that
sure.
the theater of which I've continued to be a part, just doing the play The Castle and having worked in the theater. I love good comedies and musicals. The Buena Vista Social Club I recently saw is outstanding. But the theater as an agent for social change. And that's what Fortune in Men's Eyes, John's play. But people like Arthur Miller and Ibsen, the theater can be a mirror or a catalyst for social awareness and social change. The Diary of Anne Frank, Raisin in the Sun. There are plays that when people see it becomes life-changing. And I see the theater as a partner. And one of the interesting things at Fortune Society is, as we've grown, we have an arts program because a lot of people have never been able to express themselves but through acting. We have a tie-in with the Public Theater, do acting classes, not for careers, but to use theater technique to dig into your feelings. Singing and art programs, drawing. The arts can be such an effective tool in giving people an opportunity. People who have been overlooked in our society, those men and women who usually start getting in trouble as kids, who have never had an opportunity to express themselves and find it through music or theater or drawing. It's very exciting to see.
Yeah, I think so too.
I love going over to Fortune and sitting in on the classes with where men and women who have done a lot of time are improvising and creating scenes and discovering about themselves when they do it. It's rich.
Yeah, I think so as well. That's really cool. I wanted to ask a little bit about Manhattan Mayhem, which is the newer book that you've written. I was curious, like what is the premise of Manhattan Mayhem? Why did you write it? I think this is just a bunch of really great short stories that maybe you lived through, or were they kind of are they fiction?
Well, we had something called the pandemic. Remember that?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
and I was home, as most of us were. More times, you would take walks and you'd do things, but I never had time to sit down. I had stories kicking around in my head for years, and I started putting them down on paper. And I have a literary agent because I had a published memoir years ago about Fortune Society called Fortune in My Eyes. And she read them. She said, "There's no market for this." So on my radio program, which I do weekly in New York, I said, I have these stories which I'm calling stories for which there is no market. And I started reading them on air during the pandemic as I wrote them because I was broadcasting from home. And people kept emailing me saying, "Oh, we want to buy that story." And I thought, well, if people want to buy one story, maybe they are publishable. And so I'll publish them myself. And what the stories are, certainly the Fortune Society influenced me. At least four of the stories are fictionalized versions of people or experiences that are very dramatic. One story particularly, I've called it The Uninvited. It's a grown man that I met who I knew as a little boy, who grew up, whose father testified against the mafia, and the whole family grew up in a witness protection program. It is such an isolated and unknown experience because people who are in witness protection programs just can't talk about it. And so I wrote, since I knew the family and since he was able to talk to me, but never could talk to anybody, because when you grow up in a witness protection family life, you're trained not to talk to anyone about anything. And his siblings have all gone mad or gone to turn to drugs or alcohol. But then there are happy stories, reflections on my childhood, my family, and people I've met that are interesting or quirky or dramatic. I think everybody runs into people that, certainly if you're in New York City, there are thousands of stories passing you by. If people could get their heads out of their cell phones, they might find a lot of more interesting things going on in the world than they are in their phones.
I completely agree with you. One of my biggest things, I come to the city quite often. I'm back and forth probably 3 to 5 times a year. And when I come, I stay for days at a time and I just kind of make it a trip. And it's always been like an exciting adventure to kind of be in the city, especially in Manhattan. And obviously, I kind of stay really close to Manhattan, or to Broadway, so I kind of know the district that you're talking about a little bit, where a lot of the history that you talk about kind of happened. But I love 2 things. One thing I love doing in the morning is just getting a coffee from wherever I can find one, Starbucks, McDonald's, wherever, when I'm in the city, and I just go sit on the red steps in Times Square. and just sit there. And that's all I do. Put my phone away, just watch people, just see the environment, because it's so international when people come to travel. It's a big, big tourist section. And so it's just unique to see how people respond and do things like that. But the other thing I like to do at night is just walk when the city's just a little bit quieter and be able to kind of just take a long walk and check everything out and just see different aspects of it that most people just don't get to see and kind of take it all in. It's kind of a
Robert,
cool little healing thing.
Let me add one dimension that people have a lot of fear of the subways. I love sitting in a subway car looking at the great variety. I remember sitting there looking at there was an elder Chinese couple sitting next to an Orthodox Jewish man with the yarmulke and the tallis and the beard, and two young black kids who were with their cell phones and giggling and laughing. And I looked at it and I said, well, that's New York. They're not threatened by the differences. They take it for granted, and it really is a mosaic, and it's kind of wonderful to see. And then I started imagining with each little group of people, where are they going to, and what are their lives? Where are they coming from, and do they have any idea of the other that's sitting there? Margaret Mead once wrote a famous book about growing when she went to Samoa, and it's a great. If you ever took the anthropology in school, Margaret Mead's book, Going to Samoa, and I thought, Margaret, you could stay in New York and just ride the subway, and the anthropological study would be just as fascinating, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I love that kind of like mishmash of all kinds of culture and whatever that come together. And you're absolutely right. Like being on the subway and seeing that in the city, it's very unique to see so many different kind of things happening all at once, just people sitting still. And you can kind of isolate a little bit of the story like you just did, like knowing that they come from so many different backgrounds, yet they're just all kind of coinciding and making this. I mean, Manhattan's a whole beast by itself. You either love it or you don't. I'm one of those people that absolutely do love it. So I'm really interested in learning more about Manhattan Mayhem, and a lot of the stories you have in here sounds very interesting. But I was curious, like when you start writing a book like this and you're trying to hand select potentially stories that are going to go in here, were there any stories that didn't make it into the book that you'd be willing to tell me?
Well, there are stories that are still in my head that I haven't put on paper yet.
I mean, you're so fascinating to me, so I'm really curious to see what didn't make the book is kind of a unique kind of concept.
I think stories about deep relations that I've had that I'm not ready to share. Maybe posthumously they can come out. Although I share a lot of myself in some of the stories, some of them are true stories that I've fictionalized to protect the guilty or the innocent. And then there's stories about. I have a couple about interactions with my family as a kid. Growing up in New Jersey, which is in the shadows of Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we all have secrets, don't we, Robert? That are ours, and we're not ready to share with the world.
So I'm curious,
and they may not be that interesting. Things that one of the interesting things about therapy is that things that people harbor and seem so ominous. When you spurt it out, it doesn't seem so bad once you spit it out and you take a look at it. That's part of it, I think. I'm also an observer, I think. I have a story called The Jew Story, which is loosely based on a couple, a very Jewish man and a very beautiful black woman who were desperately in love. And lived together, but she wanted marriage, and his family opposed it. And I never knew whether it was because she was black or because she wasn't Jewish. And I don't think he knew. But it's Romeo and Juliet, really. It's a love that is thwarted by social prejudices and social fears.
Yeah,
I think
that makes sense.
If you see a movie like, remember a movie called Splendor? I don't know how old you are.
I'm 45, but I don't remember Splendor. No.
Well, Splendor in the Grass. And I can't watch the last scene. It's Natalie Wood and Warren Beatty, and they were high school lovers, but all the pressures kept them apart, and they both end up with other relationships. but see each other, and when they look at each other, both having gone on with other lives, that they both are living compromised lives. That what they really wanted was each other. That's Romeo and Juliet.
Mm-hmm.
If the potion didn't work, there was once a play written where the potion didn't work and they hated each other. They were a nagging couple. It's a very funny play that was played in England. Anyway, Romeo and Juliet. Shakespeare was onto something.
Yeah, I think so. It's that's obviously a really good one, a really good play, and a good book, and even the movie was decent. So, but no,
everybody knows. I think almost everyone knows a relationship in which pressures pull the people apart when everything said that their emotions said they belong together, but economic, religious, racial, social pressures, economic pressures pull them apart, and then they settle for something else. I think the Jew story is about that. I was going to call the book the Jew story, and somebody said it'll offend too many people, and I said, well, I don't know why it would, but my intent is not to offend people, so I called it Manhattan Mayhem, and the Jew story is a story by itself.
Wow. Yeah, I'm really interested in the book, Manhattan Mayhem. It just sounds very cool. It sounds like something that I would definitely kind of appreciate, the stories that are in here from different perspectives and generations of your life, and being able to put it all together and release it as a book is a great accomplishment, because I know it's not easy to write a book. I'm in the middle of writing one. It's been 2 years, and I still haven't made it past chapter 3. So, and I think it's very similar to...
People get it on Amazon. That's how...
Yes, I saw that. Yeah, and I'll make sure that we link that to in the bio here, so people can go grab a copy of that.
There used to be a time when people, when Barnes and Noble started, everybody, not everybody, those of us in Manhattan were very upset because they were forcing out little independent bookstores. Now Amazon's forcing out Barnes and Noble. It's ironic how things go. The evolution of economic, restaurants and supermarkets. During the pandemic, and I live in an apartment building, in the morning the lobby was filled with ordered foods, and it's continued. So it affects a lot of at least in Manhattan. I don't know about the rest of Western civilization, but people ordering food by mail or however it comes in. I have to go look at the lamb chop in the butcher shop. But obviously that's a realignment of shopping procedures, which changes the stores that close because there's no customers for it.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, Manhattan and New York City is a beast of its own. And I think anyone that's never been there should at least go as a tourist and check it out. Just kind of take a little bit of the vibe, and it would probably make people understand a lot more about what people talk about. And Manhattan Mayhem is a great book. It's on Amazon, available on Amazon. Please check out also the fortunesociety.org, which is the organization that David founded, which is really, really cool. So I think if there's a volunteer opportunity and you're in New York City, that's something to look into. But David, I really appreciate you taking some time out of your morning to chat with me. I'm sure there's millions and millions of stories that you and I could share with each other if we had the time, but unfortunately we don't this morning. But I'm so glad that we were able to connect and talk for a little bit.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. This is like therapy for me, when you tell your story, it's when you have a book and people want to know what it's about and you talk about your life, it's like free therapy.
I totally agree with you. Absolutely. Appreciate your time this morning. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the show. Please take a minute to head over to www.savfair.com and subscribe to our publication.